Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is the second video in my Trans Hope series, where I offer hope to my trans viewers about aspects of their life and their transition. So today's video is going to be entirely about the idea of passing, because I got a lot of submissions about it, and I realized I have a lot I want to say. Okay, let's hop into it. So the first submission says, I'm in my last year of high school at the moment, young I know, and I'm going to uni next year. I keep getting excited at the idea of starting T before the school year begins and starting in a new city as myself. I was wondering what it was like for you when you first started getting gendered correctly in uni. Was it strange at first or completely exciting? Also, side tangent, but I'm afraid that my transition won't work, and people might still mistake me for a girl even on T. Any tips or advice on that? Well, so the first thing I'd say is that I don't really think of myself as ever having really passed when I was in university. So, in my senior year, I definitely knew that I was trans and I was trying to pass, and I was somewhere on that spectrum. So this is the thing. People often talk about passing like it's a binary. I think of passing much more like a spectrum. And a lot of the discussion about passing, about how to pass, tips around passing, videos and posts I see about it, come from people on the very beginning of that spectrum. When you're on the very beginning of the spectrum of passing, sometimes people will call you he, if you're a trans guy, so I'm a trans guy, so obviously a lot of my video presumes that, but so some people will call you he, but it's very sensitive to the kinds of clothing you're wearing, your haircut, the way you carry yourself that day, the way you pitch your voice, the people you're around. And so passing happens sometimes, but it's not really about you, it's about your choices. And so what happens is that you have a certain hoodie and you pass in that hoodie. You have a certain way you introduce yourself and you pass that way. You have certain people that read you the right way and certain people who don't, and it all feels very precarious. So when I first started passing, you don't jump to the end of the spectrum, you kind of make your way down it. And so the very beginning experiences of passing are very frightening because you worry it's going to get taken away from you, like if you misspeak, which is true, it will, right? So someone will see you, will call you he, and then will be like, oh wait, I'm sorry, she. That was very, very common for me, that I would do everything I could. I would put on the most boring teenage male clothes, I would walk in the most masculine way, I would pitch my voice down, and I would be picking up takeout, right? And they'd say, here you go, sir, and I'd say, thank you, and then it would be like, oh, like, they would wind it back. And, I remember vividly that there was a shirt that I was wearing that I got harassed on the street and called the F slur in, and it was clear that the person who was harassing me and calling me the F slur saw me as a very effeminate gay man. And so I remember I thought of that shirt as a shirt that made me pass, which is very strange. And now that I'm at the very end of that spectrum of passing, I don't think of clothing as why I pass, I think of myself as why I pass. And so when I first started getting gendered correctly, I was exciting in some ways, but it also made me very nervous. And so that's the thing, I think often when we're about to start our medical transitions as trans people, we are never at the end of that spectrum of passing. Some of us are kind of off, some of us never get gendered correctly, and some of us do sometimes occasionally before we speak correctly. And so you think you're like, oh, should I go on T? Like, do I like when I pass? But passing when you're here is nothing like passing when you're here. Passing at the very beginning of your transition is very scary. Passing at the very end of your transition is very comfortable. It's two totally different things. And I wish I could have known that. And so, yeah, I see a lot of discussions in spaces that offer passing advice, which I totally get. Sometimes pushing yourself from off the spectrum to a little bit on it, where you sometimes get a he, is really something you need. And it really makes you feel good, it allows you to keep going. But all this discussion is about choices that you make. It's if you do these things to pass. But once you're fully passing, when you're at the end of that spectrum, passing is the most passive thing ever. It's not a choice I make at all, it just happens to me. And so I think that we can think that passing is this complicated game and really get in our heads, and maybe, again, for some people at the beginning, it is. And maybe it's a game you really want to play, but it's not how it's always going to be for most people. For most people, at some point, you might reach a place where it doesn't matter if you have piercings, it doesn't matter if you have dyed hair. There's almost nothing I could do to get called she these days. And when I was before T, most of the time I got called she. When I was early on T, if I wore really male things, I got called he, but surely if I wore an earring, I would have gotten called she. And, in the middle, right, if I wore makeup, I'd probably get called she, but otherwise I wouldn't. Now I think I could be wearing, I could be wearing like eyeliner, I could be wearing more dramatic earrings, I could even be wearing a skirt and I would get called he. It would be pretty hard for me to get called she at this point. And so it's really this long spectrum, and you might not feel comfortable here, but you might feel comfortable here. Yeah, and so this question about will your transition work out, I think I spent so much time, that was one of my top worries. I wrote it down. It was a worry that my transition would not work out, that I would not ultimately pass. And sure, that happens to plenty of people, that, you know, the way you conceived of your transition working out when you started it isn't where you land. And that doesn't mean it doesn't work out, right? You move towards happiness by the steps that seem feasible, and many of us reach a place of deep contentedness and a lot of peace in our transition, even if we don't end up fully passing. I worried that my transition would not make me happy, that I would not pass, and I spent so long thinking about that. And here's the thing I would say to people that haven't really started their transition or at the very beginning steps and are spending a lot of time worrying about that. Maybe you just don't need to worry about it, right? Because it became clear to me, like a few months on T, that was just not a worry that I actually needed to have. Like, I was gonna pass. I started passing more and more and more, and it was just like obvious the trajectory I was on. And you don't really know until you started taking hormones, and you don't even know until it's been a couple years how it's gonna work for you. So you can spend all this time thinking and planning, and then maybe you just didn't need to do that, right? I had game plans for if I didn't pass that I just never needed to use because I did pass. And I think there's some amount of reflection that is really great to do, right? You know, sometimes thinking about what it means if you never pass can prompt you to think about what does it mean to be content in yourself? What does it mean to not care what people think about you? What does it mean to like break away from conventional beauty standards? And those can all be really helpful and valuable pieces of introspection, even if you do ultimately pass. But sometimes the anxiety isn't offering us anything helpful. It's just, we're just spiraling for no reason. And there's no reason to spiral if it hasn't actually happened yet. You can cross that bridge when you get there. And for many people, it just won't be relevant. I have various friends in real life, and I know various people online who had all sorts of reasons that they thought that they might never pass. Like maybe they felt like their body shape was very feminine or masculine for trans women. Maybe they thought they were way too tall or way too short to pass. Maybe they just really had poor self-esteem. They had all these concrete reasons, and then hormones just hit them like a ton of bricks, and they really started passing. And you can spend so much time worrying about what it might be like, and then maybe you just like will pass. So you can't know until you're there, and I think sometimes there's just not much use in planning it out. Sometimes I think it's just, you know what it's like to be a non-passing trans person if you're pre-T. Like, you're there right now. That's what it is. And I think it can only go uphill, right? So why not try it out and have hope that it will work out? And again, no need to have those worries yet, because for a lot of people it does work out. So the next question, will I ever stop seeing her in the mirror? I've been on T for 1 year, and although some things definitely changed, my face didn't. I do have some facial hair, but my features did not change at all. So it had been really hard for me to feel like anything changed. Like, now I just look like a hairy girl. And it's particularly hard because my face is one of the things I'm most dysphoric about, more than my top or bottom or voice or anything. I know 1 year is still early and that many things may change, but sometimes I look at other trans guys, I know comparing timelines is bad, and their faces change so much in a year. Okay, I have a few thoughts about that. One is that this reminded me a lot of this TikTok trend that I saw back in the day, where it would be, you know, often women in their 30s, and it was this filter that made you look like a 16-year-old girl, and many of them would cry because in their self-conception, they still look like that teenager, and they're not anymore. And it made me think about how our self-conception and what we imagine we look like changes so much slower than the reality. And how for a lot of us, we're still stuck in that old version of ourselves that we were when we were teenagers, even when we're decades beyond that. And that it takes some active work to shift and to grow into who you are in that moment. So I think it might entirely be that your face has actually changed more than you thought, but that what needs to happen now is that your mind needs to catch up with it. It's very hard for us to realize that we've changed because we've known each other, we've known ourselves for decades, right? The process of me swapping to Arthur from my old name took me some time because I'd known myself as my old name for so long. And I almost felt like it was easier for some people in my life than it was for me to make that swap, because they'd only known me as my old name for like a year maybe, and so, you know, what's it to change to Arthur? Whereas I've known myself as my own name for 2 decades. And I think the same thing is true with our appearance, right? Like, we don't realize how much we've changed. And the other thing is, and this is an obvious point, but I'm gonna make it nonetheless, there's so much selection into the kinds of things people post on social media, and I'm no exception to that. I was looking back through old photos, and my face changed so much from 1 year on T to now. That's the thing, like, I passed pretty quickly, but I passed as a boy. Like, I didn't pass as an adult man. And that was kind of hard for me, right? Like, it's weird to be a PhD student and get read as a 17-year-old. Like, that was happening to me then. And so I passed as male because my voice was deep. My face really looked very young. And here's the thing, what you see on YouTube and what you see in photos I post is so different. So here is an example of what my profile picture was on Facebook when I was 1 year on T. And here is sort of a candid photo of what I looked like when I was 1 year on T. So you can just see that my cheeks are so puffy, like I look like a little baby. I really don't look like, I would have been 23 at that time. I do not look like a 23-year-old. And then here's another photo that's similarly, I just look very young. And since then, I don't know, I think that my face looks super different. Like, I have stubble now, my jawline feels obviously, broader, and I know I get read much closer to the right age now. I get read as the right age now, and I did not then. And so I was always posting, the best photos from the best, it's the angle, right? If you angle yourself in a particular way, the camera, you can get your jawline to look very large, and that makes you look very masculine. And so I think that a lot of trans guys, when they're putting these comparison photos, often unintentionally, are really picking the ones that masculinize them the most. And that it is natural. These changes do actually take a very, very long time. And I know that it's common rhetoric, but you are starting at puberty, right? So it does take many, many years. I'm coming up on 4 years on T, and I still am noticing all sorts of changes all the time. And I think it's kind of natural, right? Many people say boys start puberty at 15. I'm 19 then, right? Of course, if you think about that, it doesn't stop, and we just start aging into our bodies and our faces. I think that there's a lot of aspects of just getting read as male that sometimes happen very quickly for people, right? Your voice drops and people are oh, there are rarely women with a voice like mine. But getting read as your fully baked adult male self, that is just a much slower process. It took me so much longer. That feeling of comfort and being wow, I really, really, really love my body. This is exactly how I want it to look like, did not happen in the first year for me. It took much longer than that. And it's okay that it moves slowly, but I think that we can get tempted to think it should be moving quickly because that initial gendering as male sometimes happens quickly, but that's not the same as that piece of okay, I pass to myself. And the passing to yourself is both about letting the changes happen, but also accepting that the changes have happened and really recalibrating your way of thinking so that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you see you and you don't see her. Okay, so this next person writes, I'm looking for hope that one day I'll be confident enough in myself that being misgendered won't hurt me anymore. I've been on testosterone for 4 years, and I've considered myself done with my medical transition for a while now, but I still don't pass nearly as much as I'd hoped I would by this point. I'm so happy with how far I've come, and I rarely think or worry about being trans in my personal life, but I still struggle with conflicting desires in both wanting to be perceived as unequivocally male in social settings and simultaneously not wanting to sacrifice some of the more androgynous aspects of my presentation, which feel really authentic to me as a person. Would love to hear your input if you have any. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting, post-comment, I don't know what I'd call it, submissions, an interesting submission. It makes me think broadly about how many aspects of ourselves there are, and how many aspects towards our authenticity we have. So we often in trans spaces just talk about, do you get read as the gender you are? And that's it. That's the only thing that makes us authentic. But obviously there's so much more than that. So that stage in my life when I was getting read as a teenage boy did not really feel that authentic to me because I was not a teenage boy. And yeah, I was getting gendered correctly, but people were seeing something that wasn't kind of right. They weren't making the right guesses about me when they saw my appearance. Something that might not seem at first related, but I really think is about, say, another core aspect of my identity, which is that I'm an economist. A lot of people do not know what it means that I'm an economist. They have no idea at all. And that's fine, but it's one of the most important things about me. And I think what I find frustrating sometimes is that it is very frequent that when I go to queer spaces, so I go to a random house party and I meet people, and I say I'm an economist, the response I will get is, ew, or, ugh. And that people immediately think that that I'm some sort of capitalist overlord, or that I want people to be in poverty, or that I'm just trying to make a lot of money. And that's not close to what I am as an economist. That's not at all what I study, and I'm a researcher. And, the whole point of me becoming a researcher is to one day be a professor, to put out papers, and to understand, what kinds of jobs make people happy, and, again, to ideally research things that are deeply important to a lot of people, right? We all want to end up in jobs we love, to feel secure in our jobs, to get paid appropriately, and these are the sort of questions that economists take on. And so people meet me and do not understand this core passion of mine, do not understand this core identity of mine. Like, if I talk about what are my identities, like being a gay man, being transgender, being an economist, those are all extremely important to me. It's not just that I'm like a man, that's not it. There's a lot of things, and people never get the economist thing. They don't at house parties. And I've had to just reconcile with it, right? Like, I've had to be like, okay, you know what? Like, would it be awesome if Econ had a better PR, right? Like, I think one of the big problems is that the economics they teach you if you take intro micro in undergrad is just so wrong. Like, it's not the kinds of things that economists actually study at all. It's a gross oversimplification. And not even like an oversimplification, it's like very, very outdated. And a lot of universities, not a lot, some universities are trying to push towards a more data-driven intro micro that gives you a flavor of what economists actually do. And some economists are doing a lot of work like talking very publicly about the kinds of questions that economists actually take on and sort of trying to like appropriately rebrand our field as to what we are and what we care about, because most of us are immensely liberal. Like, I actually don't know, there's not a single person in my program who's a Republican. Like, every single person is very left. And that's something that you wouldn't guess, because people have this impression of economists as we were, you know, back in the 70s, right, when people were just crazy. Anyways, so would it be awesome if people understood immediately when they met me what it means that I'm an economist? If Econ rebranded, if our culture changed of how we talk about it? Oh, absolutely. Is that going to happen for me? No, it's not. And I just have to accept that when I meet people, they won't get it. And so, right, that's the thing. Like, when I go to house parties, I can choose to either not talk about it, I can choose to try to explain to people, like to dive into it, to be like, no, these are the things I study, like, and then often people will be like, that's really cool, actually. And I've had people be like, that was very surprising to me. You know, or I can just, yeah, like, just accept that some people are gonna say that and be like, it reflects more about them than it does on me. I think this relates to me, in my mind, very core to the idea of, like, passing, right? So if you're someone that doesn't reach that full point of passing, you're gonna meet people that are gonna, like, not get you in some core way, right? You're gonna meet some people that are just gonna make the wrong assumptions. Some people you might wanna have a conversation with them, be like, actually, I am a man. And then maybe they'll get it and they'll be like, cool, I got you. Or, you know, maybe you just accept it, right? And I think that it happens case by case, right? So, like, some people, I get the vibe that I'm like, it would be really cool to dive into this with you. And I do. And sometimes I'm just not in the mood for it. And I'm like, you know what? Like, let's focus on the parts of me you get. Let's focus on the thing that we can connect over. And let's just not connect on that thing that's not gonna happen for us. And then I also think that I felt, like, very okay with it in times when I do have those core people that really, really get me, right? My family loves and respects what I do. My boyfriend loves and respects what I do. I have close friends that really get it. And so who cares if a stranger at a house party doesn't understand me, because the most important people in my life do. And I think that that's where I think a lot of people that don't end up passing land is, yeah, I mean, do you ever get to the point where misgendering doesn't hurt you at all? Probably not. Like, I think it always sucks when people don't get you. But ideally, you can get to this place where you're so comfortable in who you are, and you have those people that do 100% get you. So it's, like, frustrating, but not a big deal. And so I think that I would prompt people that are not passing, and that probably, that don't immediately see a path towards passing, right? Who are in this place where they're further along in their transition medically, or who don't want to medically transition, to reflect on other aspects of your identity that people don't get, and what have been the right ways to handle that for you, right? Is it finding a community of people that do get you and that do love and respect you? Is it working on that internally? Is it trying to explain to people that part of yourself? And I think that answer looks different for every person and different, you know, based on even sometimes your mood. And I think the other thing is, and this is probably obvious, right? But you're choosing what parts of yourself to show to people. You're not choosing who you are. Like, who you are is the same inside, but how, you know, how we display that changes, right? So this person talks about wanting to be perceived as male, and also wanting to have sort of androgynous aspects of, you know, their appearance. And so those parts of themselves are both true, right? Like, they're male, and they have a more androgynous gender presentation, or like that's what they strive towards. And maybe in some settings, there is going to be a group of people that like totally get both parts of that, where they can be both seen as male and present androgynously, and that's going to work out 100%. And maybe in other environments, they kind of had to pick, right? And it's okay to pick either one, and it's okay to change it up, right? So maybe in some places, the thing that feels most comfortable is to go for the being read as male. In some cases, it feels most comfortable to go for, you know, the androgynous gender presentation. And what you're going for in that moment does not change who you are inside. It changes what you feel would be like the most rewarding to present to people. And so again, I think about that in this, with being an economist, right? Or I think about this also, with that I'm a gay man, right? And when I'm at, say, an academic conference and among other economists, what aspects of my sexuality do I share with people? Sometimes it's nothing at all, because it feels like it wouldn't connect me with these people, they wouldn't get it, so why would I share something they wouldn't get? Sometimes I'm like, we could really connect over this, and sometimes that's because they're also gay, sometimes it's because I get the vibe that, like, I can tell you about my boyfriend and we can have a great conversation because you also have a partner you love, and we can bond over that. And I just make those calls in the moment, right, based on the person I'm talking with. And it doesn't change the fact that I'm a gay man underneath, but sometimes I want to share that and sometimes I don't. And, I think that we just often, like, you rarely meet people that get you 100% off the bat. And so you have to choose what parts of yourself you save for you and then what parts of yourself you try to have that person get. And again, it just might change based on your mood. Another conversation I'm reminded of is one I had with a non-binary friend, right? And so this person's pronouns are they, them. And so rarely is it going to be that people are just going to immediately default to they, them in public with this person, right? And that would be the notion of passing for them, is for people to read them as non-binary, as their gender. And, that might happen in certain queer settings, right? And I think it does, right, to them, because they're visibly gender non-conforming, and so in certain queer settings, people will default to them, they, them, for that person. But out in public, that might not happen. But we often act like, in the trans and queer community, like, pronouns are the only way that someone can be seeing you and seeing your gender and seeing your gender expression and all of that. And I think pronouns are super important, but there are other ways in which someone can, like, really get you, even if they're not, like, up to date with pronouns. So this was a person was talking about, like, interacting with elderly people, right, who are just not going to use they. But that those people might be actually really seeing and perceiving this person's masculinity, this person's androgyny. They just don't have the language of those pronouns for it. Like, they see this person as like, wow, this person is very butch, that's very different, I recognize that in them, like, I see that in them, I'm just not using the word they to describe that, even though I get them. And what I'm reminded of is, like, when I was pre-T, and so I was not passing, I remember I went to a hairdresser to get my haircut, and that hairdresser really advertised themselves as very, like, queer, lefty, liberal. Like, the whole website for that hairdresser was written with gender-neutral language in a very obvious and intentional way. And I was like, awesome, like, great, like, I'm definitely gonna get, like, the masculine haircut I want, even though I look like a woman, because, like, this is a website of people that, like, clearly get pronouns, they get everything, right? I go in, and I did not get that haircut. Like, this person, she gave me a haircut that was, like, way more feminine than what I wanted, and she was like, oh, this is, like, edgy and cool, and, like, and I just kept on being like, no, I want it to be more masculine, I want it to be harsher, and she just didn't give it to me. Even though, again, this, like, website was great about pronouns and whatnot. I went to a barber shop. The woman who was working there, English was not her first language, so I would highly doubt that, like, she's naturally going to be able to use they, or that, like, would have a conception of me as someone that could use he back then when I looked like I did. Right? And she certainly didn't. But she got me. And she got me so much more than the person that, like, could handle pronouns got me. And I remember she gave me exactly the haircut I wanted. And when she finished it, she said, now you are a manly woman. Right? And she called me a woman, but she got me way more than this other person that would have never called me a woman, because she gave me the manly haircut I asked for. And I remember actually feeling very affirmed by that, which is so bizarre as, like, a trans man to feel affirmed by being called a woman, but I understood that she saw me in a way that I actually hadn't really been being seen. And so I think that sometimes we can relish in those moments of, like, even if the person is not necessarily, getting us 100%, maybe that 90% looks really nice, actually. And maybe that 90% is something that we can handle. Okay, so the final submission that I'm going to read is pretty similar. He talks about, like, a lot of things, but in particular around this concern about currently not passing, and says, I've been trying to care less about how others perceive me in all aspects of my life, but it is so difficult. Frequently being read as a woman also contributes to fear around dating, not feeling like I'm allowed in gay spaces, and wondering if someone who is into men could be attracted to me. And so this is what I would say. I think it's actually really normal to care. People act like this is something you have to overcome, like you have to beat out of yourself this impulse to want people to see you. But of course we want people to see us and to get us. I think instead the exercise should be, where is it most important to target that energy, right? We can't want the entire world to understand us. There are so many people that will just never see us as us. So we have to find the people that are worth it. And I think that's half the battle, right? Is picking those people where you could actually connect, where they could actually get you, and then putting in effort. And yeah, it's normal to care. Especially when you're talking about dating, right? Yeah, I don't think any amount of self-confidence would result in you being okay with a partner that doesn't see you as a man. And in fact, I think the self-confidence is to say, hey, it's okay to wait until I find that person that's gonna see me as a man. I don't need to accept any less than that when it comes to dating. And I think a general thing I would say, again, is that this is not a trans-specific concern. When we talk about fears around dating, like, what is the biggest thing people are worried about? It's that people won't get them, or that people will get them and then not like it. That's what everyone cares about. Everyone wants someone who sees them as them, who sees all the flaws, all the trauma, all the problems, all the hopes and all the dreams and all the wants, and loves it. Like, we all want that person that we can open up to and that will like us as we are. And so I think that, yes, like, maybe being trans adds another wrinkle into that problem, right? Because you want someone that's going to see you as a man, and some people don't, right? So you're going to have to throw some people out. But we all are on a hunt to find someone that sees us as we truly are, and many people will misperceive us in all sorts of important ways, right? You'll go on a date with someone that sees you as superficial, and you're like, I'm not superficial. You'll go on a date with someone that thinks you, like, talk too much, and you're like, no, I'm a storyteller. You'll go on a date with someone, you know, that thinks that you're too assertive, and you'll say, no, I'm just confident. And so I think that's, like, really, that's the dating process, is meeting people, they don't get you, and you have to move on. And so I think it's hard when transness is so stigmatized, because it's very scary to be trans, we're told it's undesirable, we have a lot of fear as trans people. But, like, at the end of the day, it's just one aspect of our identity, and it's normal and important to find someone that gets it, right? And so I know all sorts of trans people who are in all sorts of different stages of passing, who have found people to date who really see them as them. I have non-passing trans friends that are going on so many dates that I just cannot keep up with it, and who have dating lives that are very messy in ways that are entirely unrelated to whether they pass or not. And so I think it's totally possible to find those kinds of people, right? There are a lot of people in the world, and there are a lot of people who, you know, have done the work to be really cool about trans people, right? Like, there are other trans people, the majority of LGBT people are actually bisexual, and then there are, like, lots of gay people that have lots of exposure to trans people, right? So you might have to throw out some people, or you might have to spend some time on some people who initially don't get you, but then do. But I think there will be lots of options, and you just have to put yourself out there. And again, I think that fear of putting yourself out there, where you're worried about, hey, what if I go on this date and this person doesn't see me as me? That's just the fear of dating, you know? That's just what it is. It's the fear of connection. It's a thing that every single person needs to deal with. And so I think addressing that on your transness can actually just really open up a lot of doors to really healthy relationships. It can be a really productive tool to spend time working on. And yeah, so that's the broad thing I would say, right? A lot of these themes around passing come back to authenticity and come back to us wanting people to see us as who we really are. And I don't think it's frivolous to care about that. And I also think that it's often important to think about all the different aspects that make us us, and that our gender is just a tiny part of that. We're a lot of different pieces. And so it's normal and natural to care about that. It's normal and natural to be upset if people misgender us. But you have to see yourself as a full-fledged person with all sorts of different pieces. And so I have hope that every person in their journey and in their transition is going to reach that place of peace, whether that looks like passing all the time, or whether that looks like finding the set of people that see you as you, even if you don't pass to certain types of people. All right. Thank you for watching.